Hello and welcome to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers, and you are in Season 6 of Wrestling at Random. And if you've been listening, you know the theme is somehow even more wrestling than ever. We said that in Season 5. We thought we meant it. However, we really mean it in Season 6. We've scoured the more obvious places where you find professional wrestling. We've also scoured the dark web. We've been granted access to several super secret archives, and that has borne fruit for this week's edition of the show. Jeremy, when you told me what the randomizer pulled for this week, I was extremely excited because, as people know if they've listened to the show, yes, I grew up initially on Mid-South and World Class, became a WCW kid, and the intensity of my wrestling fandom as a child was never higher than it was from 1989 to 1993, I would say, even into 94 pre-Hogan and WCW. Randomizer brings us back to one of those years, the later stages of 1991, just before Halloween Havoc 1991, for an episode of WCW Main Event.
We fire up the randomizer every week. It goes through all of that wrestling content you just described, and it will pick a show at random, and boy, did it do you a solid. I knew when I saw this come up, I'm like, Adam is going to love a trip to Main Event. Not the first time we've reviewed an episode of Main Event. NWA Main Event, February 11th, 1990, we reviewed. That's Season 4, Episode 25 of the free feed that you're listening to this episode in right now. You could go back in the archives. It's evergreen content. It's new to you. You can listen to us review an episode of Main Event. Here, this is WCW Main Event, and we're in 1991. We're on, this is like the go-home show for Halloween Havoc 1991. Fun
one
fact.
Of the many go-home shows, because as you watch this show, you're about all the different shows that WCW has, whether it be Power Hour, or Pro, or Worldwide, or World Championship Wrestling, the Saturday evening show, or the Sunday show.
This Sunday show, would you consider it the B show or the C show at this time?
I mean, it was definitely the TBS B show. You had... I mean, the big angles.
Saturday night's the A show.
Saturday night's the A show. I would say Worldwide was like a 1A, 1B type of thing, because Worldwide was syndicated, so it was seen all across the country, not just on one channel. And you would often have big angles that would play out, and then would on Worldwide and would get picked up and reshown on Saturday night. Like I remember Vader attacking Sting and breaking his ribs. That was on Worldwide. So yeah, this definitely. It was not the A show, but it was certainly above Pro, above Power Hour. But there's some pretty decent star power on this show, all things considered.
Yeah, so I actually went to Halloween Havoc in 1990, the year prior to this Halloween Havoc that they're building to. That was at the UIC Pavilion. I was in attendance. Here we're building to 1991's Halloween Havoc, and oh my, what a difference a year makes. And we'll go through the Halloween Havoc card. We will talk about the build up to this and all the things that were going on in the company at this time. The air date of this episode of Main Event was October 20th, 1991. This is just 1 month prior to this show, if you want to know where we are in 1991. Just 1 month prior to the show, Ric Flair had signed with the WWF.
I was going to mention that we had in a previous show, I can't remember whether it was here or on the bonus feed, we went into some detail about the Flair, Jim Herd, WCW situation that led to him leaving, taking the big gold belt with him, the debut of the new WCW World title, which you and I saw and held in person at Starcast a couple of years ago. So we're right in that era. It is it's basically them trying to make Lex Luger the new Ric Flair.
Yeah, if you go back to the episode in the free feed where we reviewed the Coliseum video for Royal Albert Hall, the WWF's Royal Albert Hall, Ric Flair was on that show with the debut of the big gold belt, and we go into great detail about how that happened, the importance of what happened there. But yeah, because it followed the big gold belt, the WCW title. A lot of people forget that it's actually a really nice world title belt.
It
I'm a
absolutely
fan
is.
of it.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't a, IWGP World Championship replacing that perfect IWGP, I believe, fifth generation title. Like, this is nothing could live up to the big gold belt, but on its own, like if you were to start a company and have this be the world title, you would really have no problem with it whatsoever.
And we'll talk more about it as you mentioned Lex Luger. They're trying to make him the next big thing. He is the world champion. We'll see him later on in this show. We open the show with our hosts. It's Jim Ross and Missy Hyatt in studio. Missy Hyatt, be still my heart. I've professed my love for Missy Hyatt, my first crush, and here she is again. Always great to see Missy alongside Jim Ross.
Yeah, we're not going to complain. We're not going to complain about 1991 version of either of these two people.
No, this is a peak for both of them.
Yes.
And Jim Ross runs down the upcoming show. We are 1 week away from Halloween Havoc, and Gary Michael Capetta is going to be your ring announcer. One of my favorites. Voices a nostalgia bomb, if you will, when I hear the dulcet tones of Gary Michael Capetta as the ring announcer. We go to our opening contest. Alexandra York and Richard Morton accompany the computerized man of the 1990s to the ring. It's Terrance Taylor of the York Foundation.
Yes, I was a big York Foundation fan as a kid. Love me some Terrance Taylor. I believe on the bonus feed where we had that episode of, it might have been Power Hour or Pro, where around the same era, Buddy Landell was sort of like a probationary member of the York Foundation. We were trying to decide what would his York Foundation name be, because Terry Taylor had to become Terrance, Ricky Morton had to become Richard. And didn't we guess like Budrow? And then that actually ended up being what the episode of Memphis with Bill Dundee was, the Bill and Budrow show.
That is exactly correct. Yeah, we talked about, was it Budrick? Was it Budrow?
Yes, exactly. No perfect options to guess for, no obvious option, I guess I should say. We should also note when JR throws it to Gary Michael Capetta, he makes it a point to say that this match was taped several weeks ago. The story here is that the York Foundation wants Flyin Brian gone. It's very strange because Jim Ross is he's doing a great job talking about all the times over the last month or so that the York Foundation has tried to take out Flyin Brian Pillman ahead of his light heavyweight championship tournament final or decision match, whatever you want to say, at Halloween Havoc. But Gary Michael Capetta says, just returning after a lengthy absence, Brian Pillman. I assume that is why Jim Ross felt the need to tell us this match was taped several weeks ago. I guess this match might have been Pillman's first match back from injury, and then since then the York Foundation has been terrorizing him. I'm not sure. We also hear there's a wild 6-man tag involving all of these guys on last night's episode of World Championship Wrestling.
Yeah, the finals of that light heavyweight tournament will be Richard Morton facing off against Flyin Brian at Halloween Havoc. I do love the idea of the York Foundation. It was ahead of its time, as 100%. Now we would be like, oh, it's like a sabermetrics, advanced analytics angle to this. Before in 1991 here, we didn't know quite what that was. It was ahead of its time.
Well, it was ahead of its time. It was also ahead of its technology, because I remember all the promos for this again. This was all burned into my mind. And they had this whole thing like how Alexandra York was this computer whiz who had created a program that could accurately predict the winner of a match and how to win a match, down to decimal points. But then what she had, it's like a word processor.
It's a word processor.
It's like a digital typewriter. And it's hilarious. The match starts, Taylor shoves Pillman shoves him back. Taylor battles to the floor and consults with Alexandra York and the word processor. We should also just note for Terry Taylor, this is just off of him being an absolute joke in the WWF as the Red Rooster. So
correct.
His trajectory going into that point was up and up and up, in Mid-South, UWF, and then he went to WWF and Terry Taylor for a cup of coffee, and then it was the Red Rooster, and that pretty much killed his career. So, he kind of came back as a lower mid-card guy here as Terrance Taylor.
Taylor slaps Pillman, then runs away. In the ring, they trade some chops. Pillman hits a great-looking dropkick here. Taylor cuts him off with a boot as Pillman charged into the corner. Backbreaker for a 2 count. We get a sleeper by Taylor. Pillman collapses. The arm drops twice, but Pillman, he's not out. Jawbreakers his way free. JR at this point wishes the Atlanta Braves good luck in the World Series. Spoiler alert, they lost in 7 games to the Minnesota Twins.
Yes, because again, the WCW television shows, the non-syndicated ones, were on TBS, the home of the Atlanta Braves. And while obviously the World Series would be nationally televised, they still are the home of the Braves. Also, later on in the show, Jim Ross tells us that, I can't remember who it was, maybe it was Brian Pillman, would have been the guest for tonight's episode of Wrestling Talk with Jim Ross on WSB radio in Atlanta, but that will not be on because of Braves coverage. Should note, Jim Ross he's the play-by-play man and the color commentator. It's all Jim Ross. And man, like, my memories of Jim Ross doing these shows by himself, or that he was incredible. And I was like, oh God, I hope it still lives up to that. Oh my God. He is good. Unfreaking believable. It's worth going back and watching this or any of the TV shows from this era when he does shows by himself, just to hear how great he is at doing color, doing play-by-play all at once, not rushing, making everything sound incredible. Like, this is a really solid TV match that he makes sound like a great professional wrestling match. I was amused, though. He did take some artistic license here, talking about the light heavyweight champion and saying that the light heavyweight champion will be in main events around the world. Technically, that may have happened once or twice with Pillman and Liger in New Japan, but certainly if the world includes the United States, this very short-lived, I believe less than a year edition of the WCW light heavyweight title did not main event much of anything.
Taylor tries a Vader bomb off the middle rope, but Pillman gets the knees up.
Which was always such a weird move for Terry Taylor to use. I had forgotten, like, this was a regular move of his, a Vader bomb for a guy that's like, 6 foot at most, like 220 pounds.
Pillman makes his comeback to almost no reaction. Flying clothesline gets a long 2 count. Pillman sent to the corner, jumps to the middle rope, tries the crossbody, but Taylor moves out of the way and Pillman misses. Taylor hits a gut wrench into a power bomb for a 2 count.
The doctor bomb, it's another one of those things I forgot was a regular Terry Taylor move, sometimes a finish. I was a huge Terry Taylor fan. It's like I had not seen a lot of his stuff from back then in a while, but yeah, good near fall. I love the finish of this. So Morton is up on the apron. He was ringside as well, along with Alexander York. Pillman shoves Taylor into Morton. Morton goes flying off the apron. Pillman rolls up Taylor for the win. This was a super fun match to me to open a show. Like, two talented guys, 1 week out. This wasn't random. It was the culmination of about a month of the York Foundation trying to take out or at least weaken Brian Pillman before he and Richard Morton wrestled for the newly created light heavyweight title in just 7 days from this air date.
We get the WCW top 10 list.
Yes, always one of my favorite things as a kid. I had a notebook and I would scribble down the top 10 each week. That is how seriously I took this. I think I took it far more seriously than WCW, particularly when you look at Terry Taylor comes in at number 10, which is fine. However, he just lost cleanly to Brian Pillman. They told us that match
weeks ago.
So the WCW executive committee has had time to take into account this loss. Yet Terry Taylor, 10th, number 10. Brian Pillman, not on the list whatsoever.
Johnny B. Bad at number 9. The Diamond Stud at number 8.
It was the future Razor Ramon, which is basically the exact same character, except he had a fake accent in WWF's Razor Ramon.
Cactus Jack at number 7. El Gigante at number 6. The Natural Dustin Rhodes at number 5. Number 4 is your television champion, Stunning Steve Austin.
And my personal favorite wrestler at this point, from the moment he came into WCW in 1991, I was hooked. Stunning Steve Austin was my guy. This was still the weird kind of long hair and black bicycle shorts with like confetti pattern on them that he got away from pretty quickly. But yes, they would be, by the way, Dustin and Steve Austin would go on to wrestle for the TV title at Halloween Havoc in what was really, say, by far the best match on that show, 15-minute draw.
Barry Windham at number 3. Number 2 is Ron Simmons. And number 1 is the U.S. champion, Sting.
Which basically means Ron Simmons is the number 1 contender. The U.S. champion would always be, by default, the number 1 contender in these top 10 lists, but they would never actually be going for the world title. It was very rare. Ron Simmons here, number 2 contender, but he would be challenging Lex Luger at Halloween Havoc in a 2 out of 3 falls match for the world title.
Yeah, my source of truth is always the Pro Wrestling Illustrated top 10s at this point, not this WCW top 10. So I take it with a grain of salt because I was firing up the PWIs to find out who my top 10 was.
The WCW magazine back then was awesome. From like, not the like wrestling wrap up in like 89 and 90, and not the one that would come later, but 91, 92, maybe into 93 WCW magazine was great. Full color, well-written articles. But yeah, PWI top 10. Definitely go with that. We go from this, and oh my God. We talk often, both here on the free feed and a lot on the bonus feed during the lengthy break between season 5 and season 6, how we like our enhancement talent, how we like our jobbers.
We love it.
And the specifics of that. And one of our favorite things is when you get an absolute superstar in the world of professional wrestling against the most generic, pathetic looking person on the planet. And here we get this in spades, as it is Sting looking cool. This is post Rat Tail. He's still got the spiked blonde hair, black tights with a cool pink scorpion, matching paint, matching jacket. His opponent is a man that can only be described as a 60-year-old gas station attendant to the Appalachian Mountains, Mike Fever. He has a mullet. He has a mustache. He has a singlet, a terrible body. He does not look a day under 60 years old. My notes just say there has never in the history of professional wrestling been a greater discrepancy between star and jobber, enhancement talent wrestler than here with Sting and Mike Fever.
My notes just say, all caps, my God, Mike Fever. What a jobber. What a jobber.
That pretty much covers it. We heard Jim Ross, as this match is about to get underway, tell us that next Saturday on TBS, which will be the true final go-home show, the night before Halloween Havoc, it will be Sting and beautiful Bobby Eaton, not a team from the Randomizer or Battle Bowl, taking on Cactus Jack and Abdul the Butcher. We also hear that later on in the show, Gordon Soley will have a special edition of the Control Center to tell us all about the Chamber of Horrors. The match gets underway. Jim Ross tells us that, quote, Mike Fever has a great record in regional competition, unquote. He did not tell us what type of regional competition.
No.
If this is like...
it was not professional wrestling, I know
like
that.
Like throwing bags or horseshoes, I 100% believe it. If this is regional professional wrestling competition...
No way.
Even with as diluted and watered down as 1991 quote unquote territory wrestling was, I still don't believe this man had a great record.
No, but he was tremendous to look at. Shoulder
hilarious in this match for the very brief time it went on.
Yeah, shoulder block, and Fever rolls out of the ring immediately. Sting chases Fever outside. Fever then covers his head, leaning against the apron. He covers up.
Cowers. He's up against the ring post in the apron, cowering, which works when you're inside of the ring because you can duck your head out and the ref will come in for a break. But he's cowering, and there's nothing to shield him. He's just cowering because that's what he does.
Sting doesn't know what to do. He's looking around. He doesn't know what to do. And at this point, Fever throws a quick sucker punch to Sting's stomach and then runs away and runs back into the ring. This was hilarious. I rewound it a couple times.
Tremendous.
And because you hear Sting yell, like, that was a cheap shot. And I'm like, oh, God, Fever is going to die. Fever.
So they're back in. Sting catches a kick from Fever. Fever spits on him.
He spits on this man.
Again, just think of how we describe Mike Fever. He successfully evaded Sting, but then spits on him. Sting goes to town, warp speed with kicks and punches, immediately takes him down, puts the Scorpion on. Fever taps, light speed. My notes just say that was delightful professional wrestling.
It was exactly what I wanted Mike Fever to be. This was tremendous.
It exceeded my expectations because Mike Fever, I actually believe he may, after seeing him here, he may have had a decent record in regional competition. I just thought he was going to be a total nothing. He was a hilarious, cowardly heel for about the 42 seconds this went. This was so fun.
We see clips of Big Van Vader. He will be returning soon. Sooner than probably this graphic new, as we'll get into the Halloween Havoc recap.
Exactly. Vader here. This is footage of him from Japan, which always looked so cool. And you see it on WCW television, big arena. Him with not only the mask, but the big headgear spewing the fog. You're definitely hyped to see Vader after seeing this.
We get Cactus Jack, and he enters the ring. There's a jobber in the ring who's getting introduced as Gary Michael Capetta has to run away because Cactus attacks this man at the bell. So he's introduced as Ian Whoa as Capetta runs out of the ring. It's actually Ian Weston. This is great.
Ian Whoa sounds even better to me. Cactus misses a back elbow. Weston hits a drop kick, but then Cactus hits him with a big left arm clothesline. And then invents the later stages of the last 20 years or so or more of Jeff Jarrett's career. He invents the stroke here. That's legitimately what he hits.
That's exactly what my notes say. Cactus hits the Jeff Jarrett stroke, but picks Weston up at 2. Cactus says, "Say hello to Sting," as he waves the limp hand of Weston at the camera. He makes Weston punch himself as he gets little brothered.
So great. Making him punch himself was fantastic. Also, Jim Ross says he does not give any more details on what city this was, what television show, if any, it was on. But he says that he saw Cactus Jack and Sting have a bloodbath of a match against each other. He then tells us that it will be in singles competition. That is the plan as of now. Singles competition at Halloween Havoc. Jim Ross, excuse me, not Jim Ross. That would be an amazing match. Cactus Jack taking on the world's strongest man, Bill Kazmaier, who had been brought in to, among other things, be Rick Steiner's temporary tag team partner while Scott was out with injury.
Cactus knocks Weston to the floor, hits the elbow drop off the apron to the floor, rolls him back in, gets the pin. Abdullah the Butcher hits the ring with a kendo stick after the match, hitting Weston with it as we go to commercial.
These men, Cactus Jack and Abdullah the Butcher, had been on again, off again, tag team partners, rivals. There was a whole deal where after they broke up, or every week Cactus Jack would team with a different jobber, and then him and Abdullah would beat the hell out of the jobber after the match. Remember, Lee Scott took a beating so bad that it sent him to be a referee. Good times. You could then go from there. We're sort of stealthily becoming a season 6 late stage Gordon Soley podcast. We had that episode of Ring Warriors, New Japan, under a different name from Eurosport Television, with very late stage Gordon Soley, the last weekly television show I believe he ever hosted, unless WCW had him doing some European shows around that time as well. Here, he's relegated to just doing the control center. He does a very good job leading us through this and kind of trying to make us care about things that seem a little bit ridiculous.
He starts by asking a couple of questions. Who are the creatures? Who is the Halloween Phantom who's going to be facing the Z-Man? I've got a few answers. One, the creatures. Dave Meltzer, Wrestling Observer Newsletter, reports that this was going to be the Hunchbacks, which was Jim Herd's idea of hunchback wrestlers who, if they had humps on their back, their shoulders couldn't be down, so they couldn't be pinned.
From the man who brought you the ding-dongs, the Hunchbacks.
Yeah. However, some people were so embarrassed by this idea that they denied it ever existed, so the Hunchbacks will be changing to a creatures gimmick.
Which was basically a complete nothing gimmick. It ended up being Jumpin' Joy Mags and 1/3 of the Party Boys, Johnny Rich.
Johnny
and their
Rich.
masks.
The Chamber of Horrors steel cage match we're told about. The things leading up to this. Tell us about kind of what WCW was selling you on with a Chamber of Horrors.
So I have my memories of this, which I can talk about first, and then also hear from a story from Sportster.com explaining the infamous Chamber of Horrors match. This is from a couple years ago, this article. But my memory, watching the weekly TV as I was obsessively doing, was that they first just started talking about the Chamber of Horrors, didn't get a lot of details, and then like they got really detailed and had like video features and schematics. This was like at least a month out, basically saying this was going to be like a match that was taking place like in a haunted house, and there were going to be different rooms and all this stuff. And it was like, I remember as a kid, like, I don't understand how this is going to work. Where are they going to put this in the arena? It didn't make any sense to me. That's really not obviously what ended up happening. This whole thing came from the Cactus Jack Sting feud that, you know, started in the summer of 91, eventually picked up again in 1992. We reviewed, was it a Sting or Cactus Jack curated list where we reviewed the Sting Cactus Jack?
That was our Sting curated list.
Balls Count Anywhere match from Beach Blast 1992. There was Sting giving the birthday present, or excuse me, Cactus Jack giving the birthday present to Sting in the form of a giant gift wrap box that contained Abdullah the Butcher. This led to the idea of the Chamber of Horrors. So then here's what the final idea for this was after they decided they weren't going to do the whole haunted house deal. All 8 wrestlers would start the ring. So it's 4-on-4. After about 5 minutes, a secondary cage would be lowered into the ring from above. Once that happened, the objective, the way to win would be to put one of the opposing team members into this cage, which contained an electric chair, and flip as it says, amusingly large electric switch that hung on the cage wall, which is very true. The primary cage itself looks suspiciously familiar to the cage used in the electrified Thunderdome cage match at Halloween Havoc 1989 that saw Terry Funk and Great Muta battle Ric Flair and Sting. Talk about opposite ends of the spectrum in WCW in terms of quality of cage match. Obviously no vines and tree branches this time around. The cage was also equipped with one-sided handcuffs attached at each wall of the cage, were to be used for incapacitating the other team members long enough to electrocute a single member. The teams were originally scheduled to be very different. Among other things, Barry Windham was attacked during the opening of the show. This is another core memory. They were arriving at the arena. Eric Bischoff was interviewing wrestlers as they arrived at the arena. Arn Anderson and Larry Zbyszko attacked Barry Windham, slamming his hand in the car doors, led to Windham having that cast on his arm for years. So the original teams for this, do you have that in front of you?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
So read that, because then we can go into who the actual teams were.
So when as Gordon Soley runs down this card, he talks about the 8-man Chamber of Horrors match. He announces it as El Gigante, Sting, and the Steiner brothers taking on Oz, Abdullah the Butcher, the Diamond Stud, and Barry Windham. That is the original. That is the list that they named here. However, the one-man gang was supposed to be in this match. On a September show in Charleston, he refused to do a clean job for PN News and was sent home and was not brought back. So he was replaced. The original finish of the Chamber of Horrors match was supposed to be the one-man gang losing the fall by being electrocuted by the thing, but things had changed. He was actually going to come back after the electrocution. He was going to come back thinking he was Reverend Billy Bright and be a babyface, but none of that happened. Reported by Dave Meltzer.
It's really a shame that they didn't shift the Reverend Billy Bright babyface character onto Abdul the Butcher, who ended up being the one getting electrocuted. There's also the classic thing from that Chamber of Horrors match where the switch was supposed to start the electrocution, like fell halfway through the match, and it was very obvious on camera, and they had to dance around it. But the final teams ended up being the babyface team ended up being the same. That didn't change. Elegante, Singh, and the Steiner brothers. They end up taking on Abdul the Butcher, the Diamond Stud, Cactus Jack, and Big Van Vader.
Yeah, they did that angle where they took out Barry Windham, and Vader was subbed in for Windham, and then Cactus Jack was subbed in for Oz.
Which is insane because the whole story of this was Cactus Jack and Sting, and Cactus Jack wasn't even going to originally be in the match.
Yeah, so it was they mentioned Cactus Jack. Gordon Soley said in the original lineup that he was running down that Cactus Jack was going to take on Bill Kazmaier.
Yeah, no, I mentioned that earlier. Cactus Jack and Bill Kazmaier. We'll get into the announce card in a few minutes versus what ended up happening. So we go from Gordon talking about this to then apparently I have very little recollection of this, which is surprising me, but Paul E. and Missy Hyatt have been sent by WCW as reporters to try to find where the Chamber of Horrors was being constructed. They've traveled from Secaucus, New Jersey to Los Angeles, California, and now they are in a warehouse in Dallas, Texas, we are led to believe, and ridiculousness ensues.
A guy with a knife jumps out during this skit, tries to mug them. Paulie hides behind Missy and says, "She's got a lot of money."
Missy is not scared. Paulie is terrified, which is tremendous.
Yes, he pulls out a tiny knife, and Missy is not impressed. "You're going to try to rob us with that?" The robber says it's not the size that counts, but it's how you use it. He recognizes Missy Hyatt from television. He goes to Paulie, and he's like, "And you are?" And he's trying to place the name when Paulie introduces himself as Jason Hervey, which made me laugh.
Tremendous inside joke.
He realizes he's on TV, does some impressions for the camera until Paulie blasts him in the back of the head with the cell phone, knocking him out.
Missy is sad and worried that because of all this, WCW won't let them go on more reporting trips. Gordon tries his best to save all of this by saying, if the 8 men involved in the match knew what the chamber was, maybe they would pull out of the match. It's that dangerous. Maybe that is why we aren't being told what exactly is going to be happening here. Great professional wrestling announcer work here from Gordon trying to make sense of this. He then runs down the announced card. So what he says first is Johnny B. Bad against Jimmy Jam Garvin. That does, in fact, take place on the show. Bobby Eaton versus Terry Taylor. That also does happen. It went 16 minutes, which is crazy.
Brutal.
I'm sure it was decent enough action. Those are two very good wrestlers, but still, an undercard match doesn't need to go 16 minutes in any era. We also are told Steve Austin, Dustin Rhodes TV title, that happens. Pillman Morton light heavyweight title, that happens. Van Hammer against Michael P.S. Hayes, which does not happen. Instead, it's Van Hammer against Doug Summers of AWA fame.
Nice.
Which we've somehow become a bit of a Doug Summers podcast as of late between the bonus feed and here on the free feed. The Enforcers defending the World Tag Team titles against WCW Special Forces, as you call them, the Patriots, Firebreaker Chip, and Todd Champion. That does take place. That only went 9 minutes as opposed to that 16-minute match earlier. The WCW Halloween Phantom, which there's a huge build-up to this. Paulie dangerously introduced him, and it did end up being Ravishing Rick Rude, which would really go on to set the tone for everything in WCW for the next couple of years. Begin to lay the groundwork for the Dangerous Alliance. We also are told that the main event of the pay-per-view will, in fact, be Lex Luger and Ron Simmons 2 out of 3 falls. So I guess really not a lot changed when I look at it outside of the ridiculousness of the Chamber of Horrors lineup, and then the creatures certainly not ending up being what they're originally going to be.
Yeah, except we didn't mention PN News and Big Josh are the team that beat the creatures.
Yes. 2/3 of one of the last 6-man tag team champions, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm hoping, I didn't check, but I'm hoping the finish was a Northern Exposure for the victory.
I'm hoping it was a double Northern Exposure. I like to see a PN News Northern Exposure. It'd be more impactful than Big Josh.
And surprisingly, the champ is here on this episode of Main Event. We've got the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Lex Luger coming out to the ring with that great belt, accompanied by his manager Harley Race and his bodyguard Mr. Hughes.
This is the era of Lex Luger again as world champion. He is huge, even bigger than he was prior. Just absolutely massive. He would wear yellow tights during his entire reign, which is a different look. His opponent only can be described as a bootleg Johnny Ace, Terry Bronson. It's a hilarious moment here with Jim Ross on commentary. Again, it's just great throughout the show. He's talking about Luger and Simmons and their football backgrounds. One went to Miami. I believe that was Luger. One went to Florida State. That obviously was Ron Simmons. And he says, there's rare self-awareness here from him about football. He's like, I won't go on a tangent about football. And then he goes on a long tangent about the history of University of Miami and Florida State. This cracked me up.
Luger immediately wins with a pile driver.
It's a big stalling pile driver that the story was that Harley Race, who used the pile driver to great effect as world champion, taught him this move. And it was called the attitude adjustment. That's what they called Lex Luger's pile driver, which is funny when you consider that John Cena would use a move called the attitude adjustment years later. We also find out that coming up at the pay-per-view for one night only to counteract Harley Race being the manager for Lex Luger, Dusty Rhodes will be in the corner of Ron Simmons as his manager one night only.
You can call the wrestling hotline. We get a wrestling hotline plug here, and everyone listening to this podcast on the audio version is saying the number to themselves in their head, and everyone who's watching on YouTube has already seen Adam's shirt that he's wearing right now.
Yes, I'm leaning over the microphone so you can see it. The WCW Wrestling Hotline t-shirt that I'm wearing right now, 1-900-909-9900. I was delighted when I saw this shirt available and had to purchase it. Immediately, Missy Hyatt talks at length on this show about her hotline. It's a very funny end to the show with what her hotline subject will be. We'll get to that toward the end. But yes, check our show out on YouTube so you can see that shirt. And yeah, even if you, as you always say, Jeremy, even if you don't like watching podcasts, even if you're just a podcast listener, go over to YouTube anyway, throw us a like, a subscription, just to work that algorithm and get the show in front of more people.
It's how other wrestling fans can find the podcast. So every like and subscribe definitely helps there. Yeah, you could have heard what PN News had to say for $2 for the first minute and 45 cents each additional minute.
$1.99. That makes it completely different. But yes, PN News. I'm hoping he rapped for at least the first minute.
We get a Danger Zone interview segment with Paul E. He's joined by Rick Steiner. They recap his taking on each member of the Enforcers and defeating them in singles competition. So he beat Arn Anderson. He then beat Larry Zbyszko by disqualification after Arn Anderson interfered.
Dubaz Arn Anderson, an underrated look.
And now tonight he will be taking on both the tag team champions in a handicap match. Scott Steiner out with an injury at this point.
Scott Steiner was out with an injury, but you know what wasn't out? Steiner math. We get a little bit of Rick Steiner doing Steiner math, also telling us that because Paul said, well, call Scott. And he's like, I don't know his number, which in 2025 is completely understandable because no one knows anyone's phone number. You just have it in your phone. In 1991, not so much. Rick says he likes arithmetic, ABCs, and beating people up.
We go to the ring for the tag team champions, the Enforcers, Arn Anderson and Larry Zbyszko coming out. You mentioned precursors to the Dangerous Alliance. Here's two guys right here.
Yes,
Their opponent.
Arn coming out to that awesome early 90s Arn Anderson music. Some of my favorite entrance music of all time. I can hear it in my head right now. In matching gear, or excuse me, not in matching gear, which is interesting. The Enforcers usually would wear matching white and red gear. Here you got Larry in red and white and Arn in just blue tights.
Arn gets the mic. Oh, their opponent is Rick Steiner, of course, in a handicap match. Arn gets the mic. He reminds everyone how dumb this is for Rick to do.
He calls him, quote, bonehead, which just cracked me up the way he said it.
Arn tries to back Rick into the corner, but Rick fights out quickly. Larry grabs an arm, and then the Freebirds make their way to ringside. Angle alert.
Well, angle alert, and also I love how they come out and, yes, like they're baby faces right now for the purposes of they've been feuding with the Enforcers, looking to get a tag team title shot. They are the Freebirds. They are not to be trusted. The Steiner brothers have had many run-ins with the Freebirds. We had one of them here on the podcast. I believe an episode of the Power Hour that we reviewed was the Steiner brothers against the Freebirds. So Rick is very wary here. Also, a few notes from Jim Ross. He does a great job of talking about what's going to be coming up on TV shows in the next week. On the Power Hour next week, it will be Larry Zbyszko against Jimmy Garvin, 1-on-1. Talk about a match made for the Power Hour. Next week on the main event, which will air immediately prior to Halloween Havoc the same evening, it will be Van Hammer and Cactus Jack in a match I can guarantee was not as wild as their street fight that they had at Clash of the Champions earlier that year.
They get the heat on Steiner. He tries to make a quick comeback. He gets cut off again. They go for a spike pile driver, but Steiner backdrops out of it, then goes for a top rope belly to belly. Arn from behind, and the Freebirds have seen enough, and they hit the ring. The Enforcers win the match by disqualification.
Arn Anderson was so great in this match. Like,
Tremendous.
However awesome you think Arn Anderson was, if you haven't watched him in a while, he's so much better than you even remember. All his somehow being like, he's this great, like a menacing promo. He's a great wrestler. A lot of cool moves that look painful, like the DDT, the spine buster, that awesome left hand. But he also, in terms of selling, does not take himself seriously at all and is so willing to make himself look like a fool in service of the match and in service of the guy that he's wrestling. So great here. Also, we talked about the hotline. You mentioned PN News will be a Rapmaster special. You left out the best part. Here during this match, Jim Ross tells us, after Missy Hyatt's on the hotline for a couple hours, it will be Lance Russell with PN News for a Rapmaster special. I would pay $3.99 for the first minute to hear that.
Elvira does a commercial for Halloween Havoc, and then Missy closes out the show. She's going to talk about which married wrestlers are bringing girlfriends to Halloween Havoc. This
Jim
is a
Ross
tease. I would like to
offended. He said, all the wrestlers in WCW are fine, upstanding citizens. You're making things up. And I'm just like, I believe Missy's got the dirt here.
Yes, she does. And I bet wrestlers were dialing the hotline to hear if anything was mentioned about them.
I bet wrestlers were dialing. I bet wrestlers' wives were dialing. I think there were probably some rough nights in the week between Sunday, October 20th, 1991, and Halloween Havoc on Sunday, October 27th, 1991.
Favorite thing on this show for you?
Oh, man, it's Jim Ross just being great Jim Ross. Again, we had something of the bonus feed not all that long ago with Jim Ross, 10 years basically prior to this, at the very early stages of him as a play-by-play guy calling a show completely on his own, and to hear fully formed Jim Ross just making everything sound great and making everything seem important. That was great. But as far as in-ring stuff, by far the best thing on this show was every single second we got, and sadly there weren't many, of Sting versus Mike Fever.
That is also the correct answer. Yeah, honorable mention to Arn Anderson, like you mentioned, for his underrated great performance. Always great to see him at top of his game. Worst thing on this show?
I mean, I was amused by it, but it has to be the Paul E. Missy Hyatt in a warehouse in Dallas. That whole thing was just so dumb. I would say, though, as much as like that was dumb, my intelligence was even more insulted by the idea that Terry Taylor would be number 10, the WCW top 10, and Brian Pillman, who just beat him minutes prior, clean in the center of the ring, was not anywhere to be found in the top 10 for a match that they told us was taped several weeks prior.
Yes, and I'd say the shortness of the Enforcers versus Rick Steiner match. I could have gone a few more minutes on that one as well. And with that, we're going to wrap up a podcast. We told you about the YouTube channel. Please tell your wrestling fan friends about this show. Show them how to subscribe to the podcast. We're available on all podcatchers of choice. Follow us and interact with the show via social media, of course, at Wrestle at Random. That's Instagram, Blue Sky, X, Threads, wherever you're at. Wrestle at Random. That's where you want to follow. It's the best way to interact with the show. We love hearing about your memories of these shows, and let us know if we got anything wrong. If you have a different opinion, we want to hear about that as well. And things that you loved about it, about the show, and about the era of wrestling, the shows that we're covering. Please tell us about that. We love to interact with the fans on all of the social media platforms. And we mentioned the bonus content a few times over at patreon.com/wrestlingatrandom. That is where you can unlock for $5 200 plus back episodes that you've never heard before. It's all bonus content. It's all brand new episodes.
It's the equivalent, Jeremy, of more than 6 full seasons of the show that you have never heard if you don't subscribe to the bonus feed. 200 plus and more every single week.
$5 unlocks that, and make sure you get a video version and an audio version of all of those bonus episodes as well. Check it out over at the Patreon, patreon.com/wrestlingatrandom. And with that, we're gonna call it a podcast. Adam, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Randomizer. I know that 1991 WCW isn't exactly thought of as the peak of the company, but man, I have fond memories of that era from being 10 years old. And this, I will say, for an episode of Main Event from 1991, this is better than most. This had some good stuff. I appreciate the Randomizer, and can't wait to see what we'll have next week.
We will fire it up again next week, and it will pull something completely at random from over just 30,000 entries into the randomizer.
60,000 hours of professional wrestling are possible to be chosen for next week. So not all at once. We have a higher tier on the bonus feed if we're going to watch 60,000 hours of wrestling the next week. I would probably do it, but it probably wouldn't be smart.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.